The most devastating lie we tell men is that their profound, agonizing isolation is a temporary phase, a mere symptom of being too busy. In reality, their deepest friendships died years ago, smothered by the fear of inconvenience and the tyranny of utility. This is not a logistical crisis of scheduling, but an existential atrophy of the masculine spirit, and we need to face the uncomfortable truth. The recession of male friendship is not accidental. It is the logical endpoint of a culture that taught men to optimize away everything that cannot be immediately measured, including the sacred weight of deep connection. We have replaced brotherhood with networking, ritual with recreation, and genuine shared burden with the sterile transaction. The traditional male bond, built on the slow burn of shared suffering and mutual dependence, has been rendered functionally obsolete by a hyper-efficient, risk-averse society that demands self-sufficiency above all else. The unique cruelty of this modern dynamic is that men are told they must be emotionally open, yet everything in their environment, from career competition to the crushing pressure of stoic self-reliance, punishes genuine vulnerability as a strategic weakness. The modern man, therefore, learns to build walls, but he doesn't just build them against his enemies. He builds them against the very people who might become his friends. He seeks convenience where he once sought commitment. He prefers the easily consumable, low-stakes interaction, the shared screen of a sports game, the brief exchange over a transactional business lunch, to the long, arduous work of maintaining a true bond that demands time, risk, and emotional capital. A true friend demands that you show up when you are tired, requires you to risk judgment when you are failing, and forces you into the necessary friction of disagreement. The optimized life cannot afford friction, so the modern man quietly opts out of the deep end of intimacy. He accepts loneliness as the cost of maximum efficiency. If you recognize this uncomfortable truth, if you are tired of the shallow, motivational answers that deny the reality of this profound cultural decay and the silent epidemic of male isolation, then hit the subscribe button right now. You need to know exactly how deep this crisis goes, because the first step to rebuilding something lasting is acknowledging how completely the original foundation has crumbled. The initial fracture point is always the shift from shared labor to shared leisure. Historically, male bonds were forged not in the easy warmth of mutual admiration, but in the necessary fire of shared risk and required effort. Whether building a barn, defending a perimeter, or hauling a kill, the bond was a byproduct of the task. The shared context was survival, or at least utility that transcended the self. The friendship wasn't the goal. It was the mechanism of the goal. Today, when men meet, the context is almost always purely recreational, purely optional, and easily replaced. When the only thing holding two men together is a common hobby or a shared team preference, that bond lacks the existential gravity to survive a minor inconvenience like moving house or changing jobs. The moment the hobby ends, the friendship evaporates, because it was never the relationship that mattered, only the activity. We confuse passive co-presence with active collaboration. We mistake spectatorship for solidarity, and this leads to the ultimate paradox of masculine connection in the 21st century. We are surrounded by endless opportunities for acquaintanceship, yet starving for affiliation. We can find 1,000 peers who share our exact niche interest online, but we cannot find one man who will help us move a couch without first checking his planner for a conflict. This is the difference between a network and a bond. A network is functional. It is a tool for professional or social climbing. A bond is spiritual. It is a recognition of shared destiny and an acceptance of mutual liability. The modern pressure to constantly be on and present a curated, invincible facade ensures that the only connections that survive are those that demand nothing authentic. They are friendships of convenience, and convenience is the silent assassin of depth. Consider the language we use. When a man loses touch with an old friend, he says, "We drifted apart." That phrasing is utterly passive. It implies an external force, like a current, swept them away. It denies the conscious, thousand-fold choice that both men made to stop investing. Drifting apart is not a natural phenomenon. It is the outcome of strategic, low-level emotional neglect, fueled by the belief that true friendship is a luxury you can afford to postpone until retirement. It is the calculated risk assessment that finds the immediate comfort of solitude, or the easy distraction of digital consumption, more appealing than the difficult, unpredictable necessity of maintaining a connection that might one day demand a serious sacrifice. And the moment that calculation is made, the countdown to isolation begins. But the underlying current, the true poison injected into the modern soul, is the cult of self-sufficiency. We have internalized the myth of the perfectly autonomous human, the man who needs nothing, asks for nothing, and therefore offers nothing, requiring serious commitment in return. This ideology, championed equally by hustle culture and a misplaced sense of stoicism, is fundamentally lethal to deep connection. Why? Because depth requires vulnerability, and vulnerability is a formal admission of need. The psychological architecture of the isolated man is built on the premise that admitting need is a catastrophic failure, a surrender of masculinity. He is not merely avoiding being a burden, he is pathologically terrified of being capable of being burdened. To ask a friend for help is to create a liability for him, and in the transactional marketplace of modern relationships, liability is a defect. We believe that if we can carry our own burdens perfectly, we will be maximally desirable and minimally exposed. We chase an invincible solitude, mistaking emotional flatness for emotional fortitude. This refusal to confront the necessity of interdependence is why we suffer. We are denying a primary human need, treating authentic connection like an optional software patch instead of the core operating system. We need to puncture this lie, this sanitized version of reality where emotional cost is always low. If you value this kind of unvarnished, brutal honesty, the analysis that rips away the comfortable excuses and demands accountability, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss the future installments of this essential difficult conversation. The consequence of this calculated emotional withdrawal is a kind of spiritual deflation. By systematically refusing the difficult, high-stakes investment of true friendship, we narrow the emotional register of our entire lives. We manage our connections like a risk-averse investment portfolio, demanding high liquidity and low volatility. A surface-level acquaintance is easily liquidated, it costs nothing to maintain, and can be abandoned instantly without consequence. A true bond, however, is an illiquid asset. It demands time, unpredictable emotional capital, and a long-term commitment that cannot simply be cashed out when things get rough. The modern man, subconsciously terrified of the potential pain of loss, preemptively divests from anything that matters enough to hurt when it leaves. He mistakes the absence of conflict for the presence of peace. But the peace he achieves is the peace of a vacuum, a quiet, controlled environment where nothing painful can enter, and tragically, nothing profound can grow. We suffer from a starvation of consequence. We have successfully engineered relationships that cannot fail, but only because they are designed never to truly start. This psychological posture leads to the normalization of emotional outsourcing. We have digitized the role of the confidant and the burden bearer. Instead of leaning on a flesh-and-blood friend for existential validation or deep processing, we turn to mass media, to therapy apps, to anonymous forums, or most commonly, to the seductive, endless scroll of content. We seek validation through spectacle, confusing the feeling of being seen by thousands of strangers with the feeling of being known by one. This is not connection. It is performance substituting for intimacy. The problem is that algorithms, forums, and screens cannot feel mutual liability. They can process your pain, categorize it, and return a standardized solution, but they cannot show up at 3 a.m. with a shovel and no questions asked. The therapeutic and digital industries thrive precisely on the failure of organic connection, offering a perfectly safe, monetized simulation of intimacy where the core elements, risk, sacrifice, and mutual burden, have been surgically removed. They offer a connection without cost, and a connection without cost is worthless when the real currency is needed. The real agony of this isolation is the slow, dawning terror that comes when the facade finally cracks. The self-made man, having successfully walled himself off from the messy demands of intimacy for decades, suddenly faces a crisis that transcends his professional network or his curated online persona, a medical emergency, a professional collapse, or the sheer, weightless depression that descends when the career ladder runs out of rungs. This is the moment he realizes that his strategic management of emotional risk has left him utterly bankrupt. He has 1,000 followers who will post a sympathetic emoji, but no one who will sit silently in the emergency room waiting area. His network is excellent at celebrating his victories, but utterly useless at mitigating his existential defeats. He discovers, too late, that the definition of a true bond is not shared enjoyment, but shared disaster. You don't know who your friend is until you know how they behave when your world is falling apart. The man who refused to be burdened now finds himself facing an unbearable burden alone, realizing that the ultimate cost of convenience was the absence of rescue. The refusal to participate in the necessary mess of life, the active avoidance of mutual obligation, creates a specific pathology in the modern psyche, a cynicism so deep it becomes an intellectual defense mechanism. We don't admit we're afraid of intimacy. We simply declare that intimacy itself is a myth, a romantic delusion reserved for those too unsophisticated to understand the cold, hard reality of the utilitarian contract. The goal is to maximize competence and minimize need. We mistake this aggressive self-sufficiency for moral strength, failing to see it as the ultimate act of cowardice. The man who boasts he needs no one is merely the man terrified of being disappointed, and he ensures that disappointment by creating an epistemic distance so vast that no one can ever truly reach him. This is the new spiritual poverty, the curated life optimized for praise, but incapable of receiving aid. If this kind of uncomfortable truth about the psychological architecture of modern loneliness resonates with you, and you understand the necessity of confronting these realities head-on, make sure you hit the subscribe button now. It is the only way to ensure these deeper, less sanitized perspectives keep cutting through the constant noise of superficial comfort. The sheer brutality of this social contract is laid bare when the transactional relationship collapses under genuine human need. Consider the specific case of the highly successful executive, a frequent feature in the glossy magazines and the private equity circles, who built his entire life around the principle of leveraged utility. His friendships were strategic alliances, his emotional capital invested only in those who could provide an immediate, measurable return. He was connected, networked, and perpetually busy. Then came the unexpected, public, and total professional immolation, not through scandal, but a market correction that vaporized his firm and his status overnight. The phone, which usually rang 50 times before noon, fell silent. The invitations vanished. The vast network of friends, the people who had attended his extravagant parties, applauded his speeches, and sought his counsel, simply evaporated. They did not withdraw because they disapproved of his financial failure. They withdrew because they were only ever connected to the role, not the person. His utility score had dropped to 0, and the utilitarian contract was immediately terminated. The tragedy here is that he wasn't just losing professional ties. He was witnessing the simultaneous, instantaneous proof that the connections he had mistakenly categorized as personal bonds were, in fact, nothing more than highly specialized, disposable business assets. He had hundreds of people who benefited from his success, but precisely 0 people who were willing to be inconvenienced by his failure. This brutal reckoning reveals the true cost of convenience. When you make yourself unavailable for the burdens of others, you forfeit the right to be rescued when your own personal infrastructure fails. He realized, sitting alone in the sudden silence of his expensive home, that he had built a fortress against vulnerability, and now it was a perfectly constructed prison against help. He had optimized his life for maximum output and minimal friction, but friction is where character is forged and where genuine loyalty is tested. We have become experts at optimizing the superficial elements of our lives, our diets, our routines, our feeds, while fundamentally neglecting the deep infrastructure of mutual liability that prevents human life from dissolving into atomized despair. The modern man, terrified of the risk of being truly seen and truly needed, has unwittingly traded profound, costly connection for shallow, disposable contact, ensuring that when the existential default hits, the only entity left to process the resulting isolation is the therapeutic industry he helped fund, ready to offer another perfectly safe, perfectly worthless simulation of what he has already lost. The great, unchallenged lie of the 21st century is that connection is scalable, and that the tyranny of weak ties offers a meaningful alternative to the burdensome commitments of true intimacy. We have been expertly conditioned to believe that a wide, shallow network is an asset, a form of social insurance that costs almost nothing to maintain. But this network is merely a liability pool waiting for a systemic shock, and the moment the waves hit, the shallow depth of the water guarantees that every ship runs aground simultaneously. This fixation on breadth over depth is the spiritual starvation diet of the modern professional. We meticulously track our LinkedIn connections and optimize our outreach, mistaking the volume of potential utility for the quality of actual human trust. This is mathematically absurd. Trust cannot be multiplied by 0. You can have 500 contacts, but if not a single one of them owes you the sacred debt of inconvenience, you are functionally alone. The lie here is that we can treat people like interchangeable nodes in a decentralized market, a market where the only recognized currency is immediate transactional value, and then somehow expect them to suddenly transform into steadfast allies when that value drops to zero. That is not just optimistic, it is a profound failure of existential arithmetic. We are told incessantly that managing this network is paramount, that the future belongs to those who successfully maintain hundreds of superficial agreements. This is the societal imperative that drove the ruined man's life. The belief that maximizing optionality and minimizing exposure to painful accountability was the path to security. But that path is paved with psychological insulation, and insulation cuts both ways. It keeps the cold out, but it also ensures that no life-saving warmth can ever reach you when you are freezing from the inside. The deep, transformative bonds that withstand catastrophe are not formed during networking lunches or through reciprocal likes. They are forged in the shared trauma of mutual, inconvenient sacrifice. They are the moments you cancel your own plans to help a friend move, the moments you sit through the excruciating aftermath of someone else's humiliation, the moments you loan money you can't truly afford to lose. This is the necessary friction we avoid. If you recognize this analytical depth, and you are tired of the superficial summaries of human nature offered elsewhere, consider subscribing right now. This channel exists only to peel back the layers of comfortable lies that protect us from these necessary, painful insights. The societal lie, therefore, is not just about friendship, it is about effort. We have pathologized the inconvenience required for deep connection. We see demanding friendships as high maintenance and long-term commitments as inefficient, drains on our personal freedom. This worldview reduces the beautiful, messy, risky process of human love into a checklist of risk aversion. We search for the frictionless relationship, the one that requires no compromise, no significant time investment, and certainly no shared vulnerability. This frictionless existence, promised by the same technological architects who profit from our fragmentation, is not a life of freedom. It is a life devoid of anchors. When the true storms come, the job loss, the unexpected illness, the unbearable grief, the anchorless life is simply swept away, observing its own dissolution in high definition through the screens that promised connectivity. The man sitting in his silent home was not just suffering a financial default, he was experiencing the precise, predictable consequence of optimizing human relationships for pure convenience. He had successfully eliminated all the beneficial friction that would have created a meaningful counterweight to his spectacular fall, leaving only the chilling truth. The efficiency he craved was simply the swift, ruthless efficiency of abandonment. This catastrophic preference for convenience, this avoidance of the necessary friction, is not a simple byproduct of modern laziness. It is a meticulously constructed psychological defense mechanism rooted in the pathological fear of emotional bankruptcy. We have learned to treat our deepest bonds not as sources of strength, but as volatile, uninsurable assets. The underlying anxiety is simple. If I invest my entire authentic self into a relationship that demands inconvenient sacrifice, and that relationship dissolves, the resulting loss will be total and irreparable. Therefore, the contemporary calculus dictates that we must diversify our emotional portfolio. We keep connections shallow, broad, and low cost, ensuring that no single withdrawal can devastate the entire account. This emotional hedging is why we confuse psychological armor with genuine resilience. We mistake the ability to walk away from a low-stakes connection without pain for actual strength, when in truth, we have simply engineered a life where nothing is valuable enough to grieve. The frictionless relationship is, psychologically speaking, a contract that minimizes the potential for suffering by minimizing the potential for significance. We become experts in managing risk, only to discover that the greatest risk of all is the successful elimination of deep, necessary feeling. The soul that refuses to tolerate the agony of potential rejection eventually achieves a sterile emotional stasis, a quiet death where the heart beats, but never truly strains itself against resistance. We are living through an epidemic of voluntary emotional anesthesia, meticulously self-administered under the guise of personal boundaries and self-care. These are often noble concepts bastardized into instruments of detachment. We use the language of therapy to rationalize the absence of inconvenience, labeling any relationship that demands effort or confrontation as toxic or draining, effectively placing a psychological buffer between our fragile ego and the messy reality of mutual interdependence. The defining characteristic of emotional maturity, the ability to sit in discomfort for the sake of a higher value, is systematically eroded. We have outsourced confrontation to text messages, vulnerability to filtered posts, and depth to curated personas. The resulting personality is one optimized for performance, not reality. It is a self-built, on the terrifying premise that acknowledging need is an admission of failure. In a hyper-competitive capitalist framework where personal efficiency is conflated with moral worth, any relationship that slows your progress, demands your unplanned time, or forces you to admit weakness is viewed as a systemic drag on your personal productivity metrics. We have accepted the chilling equation. Inefficiency equals emotional failure. If you recognize this brutal rejection of the performance self, if you find solace in peeling back the comfortable layers of psychological optimization to look at the difficult truth, then support this work by subscribing. It is the only way this depth can survive against the constant pressure of superficial, easily digestible content. The pursuit of frictionless living is merely the sophisticated avoidance of the shadow self, the parts of us that are needy, imperfect, and wholly dependent on others for validation and survival. If we commit deeply, if we sacrifice our time and our comfort for another person, we must acknowledge that their presence is critical to our equilibrium. That acknowledgement is terrifying, because it means we are no longer fully autonomous. We are interdependent. And interdependence means shared fate, shared risk, and shared pain. The man sitting alone in his silent default was experiencing the terminal phase of this autonomy obsession. He had optimized his life to require no one, succeeding so thoroughly that when crisis hit, his optimized system functioned perfectly. It ejected all unnecessary high-friction components. The terrifying realization is that he was a victim of his own efficiency, proving the universal law. The resistance we seek to eliminate is the very force that defines us. The relationships we deem high maintenance are often the only ones strong enough to maintain us when our personal foundations crumble. We confuse the easy flow of superficial connections with the deep, slow flow of enduring currents. Easy water is often stagnant or fast-moving, only to rush over the surface. The water that carves canyons and holds the ecosystem together moves with immense gravitational friction. We have chosen the ease of the brook and forsaken the depth of the ocean. We suffer from spiritual atrophy born of convenience. The soul requires resistance to develop its tensile strength. It needs the heavy weight of commitment, the sharp edge of conflict resolution, and the deep burn of necessary sacrifice. If you only engage in soft, easy connections, your internal landscape will become soft and easy, devoid of the necessary muscle memory for endurance. When the unexpected tragedy arrives, the kind that truly tests the capacity of a human being to withstand the absurd cruelty of existence, the frictionless individual breaks instantly. They lack the emotional scaffolding, built over years of mutually inconvenient sacrifice, that prevents total collapse. They look for the quick fix, the easy escape, the technological balm to soothe the unbearable reality, only to find that depth cannot be downloaded and resilience cannot be outsourced. The tragedy is not that they were abandoned. The tragedy is that they spent their lives diligently optimizing their world to make abandonment the most efficient outcome possible. We must stop pathologizing the demand for attention and the request for sacrifice. These demands are not weaknesses. They are the fundamental signals of a robust, demanding, and ultimately life-saving connection. They are the friction that saves us from floating into the sterile, endless void of absolute, terrifying freedom. And this is the final, agonizing truth. The human nervous system was never designed for zero resistance. We are creatures of gravity, defined by the downward pull and the immense muscular effort required to stand upright and defy it. When we eliminate all friction, we don't achieve freedom, we achieve weightlessness. And in weightlessness, there is no direction, no structure, and ultimately, no self. The pursuit of the frictionless life is not the pursuit of happiness. It is the subconscious desire for dissolution, to be so unburdened that you simply cease to register against the fabric of reality. We confuse the absence of suffering with the achievement of peace, mistaking a coma for nirvana. Convenience is just a euphemism for sensory deprivation, a deliberate dulling of the edge of being, and the result is the same whether you are starved of nutrition or starved of necessary challenge: atrophy and inevitable collapse. If we continue on this path, optimizing every rough corner and streamlining every demanding interaction, we will achieve a state of perfect functional efficiency at the precise moment we realize we have nothing left to function for. If this kind of brutal honesty, the kind that cuts through the convenient lies of modern life, is what you need to hear, then do the inconvenient thing and subscribe now. Support the content that demands friction, not just ease. The verdict, therefore, is unambiguous. The only life worth living is the high-maintenance life. It is the life defined by commitments that chafe, relationships that demand agonizing negotiation, and work that forces you to strain against your perceived limits. This high-maintenance existence, this chosen difficulty, is not a burden. It is the mechanism by which the universe informs you that you are real and that your presence carries weight. Stop chasing the optimized silence of the machine and start listening for the beautiful, infuriating roar of a life that is actually happening. Your soul is an anvil. It requires the hammer of resistance to take shape. You must willfully choose to accept the gravitational drag of meaningful existence, because if you refuse the small, necessary friction of daily sacrifice, you will eventually find yourself trying to stop the catastrophic, unmanageable friction of total breakdown. And by then, it will be too late. The cost of optimizing away your humanity is simply your humanity itself. I will tell you, frankly, I do not trust the peace of the man who has avoided all conflict. I only trust the peace of the man who has survived the storm he chose to enter, for he alone has earned the resilience that anchors him to reality. The choice is always before you. Will you live in the perfectly smooth, shallow water of the convenient lie, or will you dive into the turbulent, deep current of demanding reality? The smooth path leads only to the vanishing point. Choose the path of resistance. Choose the beautiful difficulty. Choose the life that fights back. Join the minority who refuse the ease of the terminal decline. If you value this analysis and want to be part of the community that chooses depth over speed, then subscribe now. We are the ones who are willing to pay the cost of knowing the truth. The terrifying truth you must internalize is that convenience is a spiritual anesthesia. It numbs you just enough so that when the real crisis arrives, you have forgotten how to feel, how to fight, and even how to be present. The optimized life is not a successful life. It is a life that has been successfully preempted, sterilized, and filed away before it ever truly began. The final, definitive verdict is this: there is no shortcut to substance. You must earn the weight of your own existence through persistent, intentional difficulty, or you will remain forever floating, unmoored, and ultimately irrelevant. Your destiny is not to glide, your destiny is to grind. Let the masses chase the algorithmic comfort, the curated echo chamber, and the perfect, frictionless transaction. Let them mistake silence for peace. I would rather endure the demanding chaos of a life that is truly mine, full of jagged edges and necessary conflicts, than inherit the optimized tomb they mistake for freedom. Never forget that the hardest thing you will ever have to do is be yourself, completely and without apology, and that impossibility is the measure of your worth. The journey toward depth is necessarily lonely, but it does not have to be solitary. If you have been nodding along, recognizing the shadow of the machine in your own life, then join us. Subscribe to this channel now. We are the architects of our own resistance, the minority who refuses to trade depth for speed. This is where the real conversation happens. The final truth is that you cannot optimize your way to meaning. You can only fight your way there. Every moment of genuine struggle is a prayer whispered to your future self. The easy life promises peace, but delivers oblivion. We reject the oblivion. We choose the burden of being fully, terrifyingly alive, which means accepting that the measure of your life is proportional to the resistance you overcome. Stop waiting for permission to be difficult. Be the difficulty. Choose the scar over the polished veneer. This is the community for those who understand that the deepest comfort is earned, not given. Do not wait for change to happen to you. Become the change. The frictionless path is merely the quickest route to becoming someone else's data point, a predictable input in a system designed to manage complexity out of existence, and therefore manage humanity out of existence. The only real act of rebellion left is the willful, persistent refusal to be tamed. The radical choice to keep your edges sharp, your conflicts unresolved, and your existence fundamentally messy. If you hear that call to resistance, if you recognize the profound value of the earned life, Then subscribe and join the ongoing conversation. The game is rigged only if you agree to the rules of ease. The final devastating verdict is that comfort is the ultimate anesthetic, and to optimize for comfort is to optimize for nothingness. Choose the burning center of reality over the sterile periphery of simulation. Choose the friction. If you are ready to stop consuming the map and start carving the territory, join us.